Welcome to Wind and Fire. I'm Gene Packwood with Anglican Renewal Ministries Canada. We're going to continue hearing from Pastor Kevin Johnson, who's the District Superintendent for the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada in the Maritimes. He's going to continue to tell us about the process as he became more and more open to the working and gifts of the Holy Spirit in his life and ministry. I think you'll find it instructive.
There were a few events as I was growing up. There was the baptism of the Spirit, the miracles that I saw in church as I was growing up. And then before Anne-Marie and I got married, we actually attended a vineyard church where some of my family had started to attend. And there was a prophetic person there who asked if we wanted a word from the Lord. And this was another one of those moments. And he spoke to me and he spoke to Anne. We weren't married, and so he treated us as individuals, not as a married couple. But he spoke to her and he spoke to me, and our mouths just kind of dropped open. It's like, okay, God, this stuff really is real. And I say that to say that because in our movement, there was a period of time where, because we became reactionary against some things that were going on, there was a real move within our movement of no apostles, no prophets. We don't give place to that. And all we could ever look at was the problems with all of that. And instead of really focusing on what God was doing and how he was using people in dramatic supernatural ways through this kind of ministry. And so that encounter with the prophetic stayed with me. Then I attended a John White service in Halifax. During the renewal of the 90s, he came to Halifax to speak, to try and help people understand some of the things that were happening with the renewal movement. And I remember being there, first time this had ever happened to me, being there, as asked people who wanted prayer. And I was there just, praying and expecting sooner or later somebody will come along and pray for me. And as somebody was, I don't know who it was, they're walking toward me, I felt this force, not an aggressive force, but just a gentle force, just push on me. And I actually pushed against it, and I still went down. I didn't push against it hard, but I pushed. It's like, no, this is in my mind, and down I went. So I say those things to say that there was these little times where these small circumstances happen that God was continuing to try and prick my attention, get a hold of my attention, and I wouldn't go all in. And so one of the things that I struggled with a great deal was the fear of man. Struggled with what people would think of me. Struggled with how I would be received. And so in the course of ministry, the day came in 2011 when I was elected to be the district superintendent / bishop of the Maritime District here in Canada. And during my early years, I really was going hard after leadership development, figured this was the answer for our pastors, this was the answer. And in my pursuit of trying to lead well, help our pastors lead well, I was getting so restless and dissatisfied because I wasn't seeing things happen in our churches. I wasn't seeing lives change. We weren't seeing people come to know Christ. There was a lack of power, a lack of authority. And as I was chasing after this, there was this inside, I was getting restless. I was getting frustrated. There were days when I would just be so despondent about not seeing things change. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I thought, he actually is a superintendent in another part of the country, and he was having Holy Spirit emphasis days. And so I had a conversation with my thought, now, isn't this interesting? As if it should be so foreign. It certainly wasn't foreign with him. And I spoke to him and I said, Lori, I asked him about a guy named Doug Schneider that he had come in for these meetings. And he said to me, I think that Doug is one of the few genuine prophets we have in our movement. This caught my attention because I had huge respect for Lori. So I called Doug and I asked Doug if he would come speak at one of our conferences. And I was hungry. I was frustrated. I thought there's got to be more. So Doug came and we picked him up at the airport. We talked all the way to the conference. Afterwards, we talked all the way back. We actually had, I think it was a 3-hour drive there and a 3-hour drive back. And we spent time together and Doug just poured his life into me. And I started to ask him questions about nobody's taught us our movement has long forgotten how to move in the Spirit. Our movement's long forgotten how to move in the gifts of the Spirit. We have individuals within our movement that still do, but it's really not a focus for us anymore. And he said to me, read Randy Clark's book. So I hope you don't mind. I'm going to use some names here because this has been part of my journey. He said, read Randy Clark's books. I said, okay, well, it might get me in trouble, but I'm going to read Randy Clark's books. And I started to buy everything that Randy wrote. And I just began to devour it. Now, at the same time, and so this here was in 2016. So I'm now at this kind of recent part of my journey. This is really when things started to unravel. I guess, yeah, they did. They really started to unravel. Around 2016 is when things started to unravel. I began to read Randy's books. My wife was taking a course from one of our training schools, and she was so frustrated because she felt like they were just teaching a critical, cynical perspective on kind of weird, unusual things that the Holy Spirit does. And it felt like they weren't being shown how to move in the Spirit, but just always pointing out the things that we just need to stay away from. And she was getting so frustrated. So I started to throw Randy's books at her. I said, read this, read this, read this. So Anne-Marie and I both have this dialogue going on between the two of us. She's getting frustrated on her side. I'm getting frustrated on my side. And we were both in a place of enormous discontent. And I from our experience, I'd like to suggest that if you want to see God move in power, the first step is there has to be enormous discontentment. There has to be enormous discontentment with the way things are. And I think up until this time, we were satisfied. I mean, it wasn't great, but we were okay just to put in our time and pastor and lead well and, kind of go through the routine. But we really got to a place where we were enormously unhappy, enormously discontent, starting to get frustrated. We had to watch our hearts because then you start to look at everything critically. And so we had to be careful of our hearts. But we were so discontent. And then almost 2 years later, I'd been in ministry for almost 30 years at this time. It was June 2018. I'd been the district superintendent for 7 years. My focus had been on leadership training. I was still in this state of frustration for almost a 2-year period after meeting Doug and developing friendship with him and dialoguing with him over the couple of years. I heard that Randy Clark was coming to New Brunswick. Now, I'm not here to glorify Randy Clark at all. This is a God thing. This is what God was doing. So please understand that. But I do believe in honoring those who have given themselves to the Lord and God has used him. And so I heard that Randy was going to be coming to New Brunswick on the radio. And I came home and I said to Anne-Marie, Randy Clark's coming to New Brunswick. We're going. I don't care what we have to do. I don't care what we have to move or shift in our schedules. We have to go there. And at that time, I was on the verge of quitting. I felt like quitting. I felt like I was near burnout. I was so tired of all that I was like, I wrote down here, I was like a worn out, tired sponge. That's just how I felt. So when we arrived, my antennas are up. I'm with a bunch of weirdo charismatics, and not really. I'm just, that's where my mind was. I'm walking carefully. I'm guarded. I want to make sure that, I'm seen as decent and respectable, After all, I've got to, represent the PAOC properly if I'm going to be in these circles, behave myself and all those kinds of things that are in the back of my mind. But I just really appreciated Randy's ministry. I felt he was so well grounded in the Word. He had a grasp on church history that I appreciated. And he was living the experience. And I was at the point where I was so fed up and tired of listening to people criticize other individuals about what they were doing when it comes to following the Spirit and operating the gifts of the Spirit. It's like, okay, well, you show me what's going on in your life. Well, nothing. Well, then don't criticize people that have got something going on. At least they're willing to get out there and try, and they're learning. But I just loved what was going on, and there was no whooping up the emotions. There was no trying to rev up the crowd, and it was just God was doing stuff. So Thursday morning came. And it was the impartation service. And Randy preaches about impartation. And I'm sitting in the front row. I thought I'm getting to the front row for the rest of the services. And I'm sitting in the front row. I'm sitting there with one of our pastors, actually a pastor from the largest church we have in our district. He came to the meetings because he's been hungry for God, and he was sitting next to me, and Amory was on the other side. He had somebody from his church. So we were there in the front row. We were there. We wanted everything. And Randy walks through what he normally does at the impartation service. And if you sense God doing things, you sense something manifesting in your body, you feel something. And my right hand started to shake. And I thought, that's just me. But it just kept shaking. And then he asked people to come who are experiencing any kind of manifestation, come to the front. And I think I was the first or second person to the front. God, I want whatever you've got for me. And I started to shake, and my left hand started to shake, and my entire body started to shake from head to toe for 45 minutes or so. And Randy and his team just prayed gently for me. They just put their hands on my hands. They just gently touched my chest. They just prayed as they prayed for other people. And my hands shook so violently. I don't know that I could ever do that in the natural for 45 minutes long. And the prayer that just went over and over in my mind during this was, I don't want to be the same. I don't want to be the same. Over and over and over and over. And after about 45 minutes, the Spirit just sort of began to lift, and I began to just kind of relax in his presence. I found a seat and I sat down. I don't think I've ever been so overwhelmed in my whole life. I would call it a fresh baptism. I don't know what else to call it, but a fresh baptism, and certainly an encounter with the Holy Spirit. The next morning, there was another speaker, and they asked people just to come to the front and kneel down. And I went to the front, and as soon as I knelt down, I just began to shake again. And it was like I was really, really cold. And I was shivering, although I wasn't shivering, but I was shivering and shaking. And I wasn't cold at all. And this went on until for some time. And then I just get up and found a seat. And we left those meetings and headed home. And Amory and I, we talked a little bit about it. And I'd had this encounter. And the Lord spoke to Amory and worked in her life during this time as well in a different way. And I didn't know anything had happened other than I'd had this encounter with the Lord. Also during that time, there was some teaching on the gifts of the Spirit and healing, which was wonderful. And I soaked that up. But I didn't know that much had changed. But one thing I was certain of is that this constant skepticism and hesitancy in my life was dramatically reduced. It's like I just couldn't deny that this had happened.
Hesitancy dramatically reduced. and a new openness to the Holy Spirit. I've enjoyed listening to Pastor Kevin's story. I'm Gene Packwood with Anglican Renewal Ministries Canada. Thanks for watching.